Different questions asked in different ways, all getting to the same point. Black, BAME, BME, BIPOC, ethnic minority. Different questions asked in different ways, all getting to the same point. Black, BAME, BME, BIPOC, ethnic minority. My name is Shereen and I'm founder and managing director of HR Wired. And if I had £1 for every time somebody had said to me, in different guises of course, but I'm just not sure what to call you people, you know? And this is not a video to judge those people who are not sure what to say, but instead, I want to tell you about the words that I use and the reason why. So I'm not positioning myself as the fount of all knowledge in this, but I do think there are some casual mistakes people are making because they haven't gone to the depths of understanding how important language is. When you're trying to demonstrate that you're anti-racist, that you're trying to demonstrate that you've done some work to understand how we got here. Language is a really key part of that. I want to make a few disclaimers though before I start, and I want to say it now, so hopefully you will still be with me at the end, is to say my first rule of thumb, if possible, is always to ask people how they identify from a cultural heritage point of view. So whilst I'm going to give you views about why I use certain terminology above other words, it doesn't mean that you should take it as gospel and literally be like, because Shereen said, we can only use these words, and these words. So always ask if it is possible. And then the second point to make is be aware that in different parts of the world, there are different connotations to different terms. So whilst we may take words in their is literality even a word? I don't think it is, but let's just go with that. So if we take the word black, for example, there are parts of the world that doesn't identify with the word black. They don't know what that means because for them, they identify people according to the countries that they're from, or individuals identify themselves as the cultures or the countries where they're from. Black is a political term and we must remember that. You know, it doesn't exist in the truest sense. It was to serve a purpose, but I'm not going to go into the detail of that now, but I just want to make this point clear, you know, that there are different connotations in different parts of the world and also in different contexts. So always be aware of that. The first thing is to say is be specific. So if you are talking about colleagues who are black, who are of the black community, then say so. It is all right to say the word black. I refer to myself as a black woman, you know, so that is absolutely fine. First, let me start off with BAME, a phrase that I would hope is consigned to the history textbooks, never to be used again going forward from this day onwards. So BAME stands for Black, Asian, Minority, Ethnic. Now, despite whatever people will say, and you will hear often conversations about this, it was a phrase that was put together from a data perspective. It actually came from the UK government, civil service, about how to classify people according to their non-white status. But because they didn't want to get into the reams of identifying people according to their countries, etc., BAME became a useful, simple and easy way of being able to lump groups of people together under that label. And therefore going forward, you will hear people talk about BAME, the BAMEs, please delete that, any phrase in that context. And in essence, I'm going to say it dehumanizes us. You know, it lumps people together who have very different experiences of the world, very different cultures. And in the context of racism and anti-racism and racial equity and thinking about inclusion and doing differently, remember that the experiences of different groups are different. You know, the experiences of racism according to people who identify as black is different to people who identify as Asian, which is different to people who identify themselves as Indigenous or Aborigines if you go to different parts of the world. So my personal view is it's careless and clumsy, which is why you never hear me use the phrase BAME. But if you are to use it because you're referring to, you know, I don't know, a white paper or a piece of insights that was done in the past and they utilise that term, I would always put it in inverted commas, because the inverted commas denotes that you understand the limitations of the phrase. And even better, put it as a footnote as well. So that's BAME. The next one is ethnic minority. Oh gosh. So this is an alternative to BAME, often used in the same context. It is a phrase mostly used within the UK, if I'm honest, and it's to denote the fact that people who look like me, who are, you know, Asian, Indian, basically who aren't white, are seen as ethnic minorities by definition of the statistical proportion of how many of us are actually here in the UK. The reason why I don't use ethnic minority is, one, because factually it's actually not correct if you understand the world as a global population. Those of us who would be labelled as ethnic minorities or BAME actually make up the global majority. So if I have to use this term as a way of grouping together people, melanated individuals, should I say, people who don't identify as white for whatever reason, you will often hear me use the phrase global majority. And it's deliberate because I want to use it as a tool of empowerment. I want to remind people that they're not inferior, even though statistically they may occupy a small part of, you know, their community or society as a whole. It doesn't mean that they don't have power. So, you know, it always, what's the word, triggers some people when I use the phrase global majority, because actually some of the feedback I've had is people have said they find it threatening. And my counter response is, but why have you been okay with ethnic minority for all of these years? So why is that okay? Even though statistically in a global sense it's not correct, but global majority you find really uncomfortable. So I just leave them there with that one. For me, in the work that I do, when I look at organisations and even individuals, if I'm honest, if I still see them using phrases like BAME as an example, not in inverted commas, it's a sure sign for me that they probably haven't done the work to deconstruct language and not really understanding how large groups of people who are represented by that phrase actually don't like it. So that's just my watch out for that point of view. Now in the US, I'm just going to jump across the pond for a little bit, and you may hear terms like BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, no, what's it, BIPOC? Black, Indigenous, people of colour, I had to remember that. Or, what's the other one? POC, people of colour. And again, it's kind of utilised in the same way that we would use BAME or ethnic minority. It's just a way of grouping people together who aren't white. I personally don't know enough about how accepted or not that terminology is in the US. Again, I would always urge people to question, to ask the people who are actually technically labelled as such, rather than assuming that just because everybody uses it, it's okay phrase to use. So I would always ask from that context. You will never hear me refer to people who are underrepresented, overlooked, underestimated, whatever those phrases you want to use, as minorities, because that implies an identity. So I will use the phrase minoritized to denote that a label is placed upon somebody which is different to them actually having minority as a status or a way that they identify. I also would apply some caution when using the phrase underrepresented, because it has to be in context. And the reason why I say that is because there is a difference between representation and the presence or lack thereof of racism. So too often when people use the term underrepresented, there is an assumption everybody else knows what that means. Despite everything that I've said, if in doubt, just ask. You know, that's far better, it's more respectful, it shows that there's a genuine intent to say the right things, and for people to think, oh my God, it's just more work. What I'm saying is you can perpetuate more harm just through ignorance in the words and the language that you use.